What happens when a badge becomes a shield for prejudice and the defenseless victims turn out to hold the keys to the entire city? Two innocent teenagers, a frantic manager, and a veteran police officer who made the biggest, most expensive assumption of his life over missing iPads at a local Chick-fil-A. He thought he was putting a pair of unruly kids in their place. He had no idea the metal handcuffs he just snapped shut would trigger a catastrophic $3.2 million downfall. The Crestview suburb of Atlanta was the kind of affluent, manicured neighborhood where trouble was usually measured in HOA violations and aggressive PTA meetings. It was a Tuesday afternoon, specifically 3:45 p.m., and the local Chick-fil-A on Maple Street was vibrating with its usual post-school rush. The scent of peanut oil, toasted buns, and freshly brewed sweet tea hung thick in the air. Tucked into a corner booth near the heavy glass exit doors sat 15-year-old Isaiah Robinson and his 14-year-old cousin Malik Caldwell. They were practically submerged in a sea of AP history textbooks, crumbled waffle fry cartons, and empty lemonade cups. They were good kids honor roll students, track team alternates, the kind of teenagers whose biggest rebellion was staying up past midnight playing Call of Duty. They both had their school-issued heavy-duty silver iPads resting on the table, displaying a shared Google Slides presentation about the Industrial Revolution. Across the dining room, near the mobile pickup counter, a storm was brewing. Chloe Harrington, a 30-something real estate agent wrapped in a beige trench coat, was frantically digging through a massive leather tote bag. Her face was flushed, her voice climbing to a hysterical pitch that cut through the ambient chatter of the restaurant. "I literally just had them," Chloe shrieked, slamming her hand on the counter. "Two brand new iPads. I bought them at the Apple store at the mall 20 minutes ago. I set them down on that high-top table to grab my mobile order, and now they are gone." Gregory Sutton, the 24-year-old shift manager, looked terrified. He clutched a sanitizing towel, his eyes darting around the crowded dining room. "Ma'am, I can check the cameras in the back, but it might take a minute." "I don't have a minute, Gregory," Chloe interrupted, reading his name tag like it was an insult. "They were just here. Someone in this restaurant stole them." At that exact moment, Officer Mitchell Hayes pushed through the double doors. Hayes was a 12-year veteran of the Crestview Police Department. He was a broad-shouldered man with a tight buzz cut, a rigid posture, and a reputation in the department for being aggressive, impatient, and thoroughly convinced of his own infallible intuition. He was just stopping in for a discounted spicy chicken sandwich, but the moment he stepped inside, Chloe intercepted him. She launched into her frantic narrative, pointing wildly at the high-top table, gesturing to her empty tote bag, and making sweeping accusations about the clientele currently in the restaurant. Hayes didn't ask Gregory to review the security footage. He didn't ask Chloe for the serial numbers or the exact descriptions of the iPads. Instead, he placed his hand casually on his utility belt and slowly scanned the dining room. His eyes passed over a group of soccer moms. They bypassed a table of elderly men drinking coffee. They skipped over a rowdy group of middle school girls. His gaze stopped, locked, and hardened on the corner booth. Isaiah and Malik were the only two black teenagers in the restaurant. They were dressed in oversized hoodies, quietly talking over their project, occasionally tapping the screens of the silver iPad sitting plainly on the table between them. To Officer Hayes, it wasn't a coincidence. It was an open and shut case. "Stay here, ma'am," Hayes told Chloe, his voice dropping an octave into a low, authoritative rumble. "I think I see exactly what happened to your property." Isaiah was in the middle of explaining the impact of the cotton gin when a shadow fell over their table, blocking out the afternoon sun streaming through the window. He looked up, expecting to see a worker coming to collect their trays. Instead, he found the brass buckle of a police utility belt at eye level. "Let's make this easy, boys," Officer Hayes said, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how they were doing. He just leaned over the table, invading their space. "Hand them over." Malik blinked, his heart instantly seizing in his chest. He was a notoriously anxious kid, the type who double-checked his backpack 3 times before leaving the house. "Hand what over, sir? Don't play dumb with me," Hayes snapped, his hand resting conspicuously on his taser. "The iPads. You snatched them off that lady's table, brought them over here, and thought you could just sit here and play on them like nobody would notice. Hand them over right now, and maybe you don't leave here in the back of my cruiser." Isaiah, older and slightly more aware of the sheer danger of the situation, slowly put his hands flat on the table, palms down. "Officer, these are our school iPads, property of Crestview High. Look, there's a barcode on the back of mine." Isaiah slowly flipped his iPad over with one finger. There, plain as day, was a neon green sticker reading, "Crestview Independent School District, Accept number 4902. Hayes didn't even look at the sticker. He felt his authority was being challenged by a kid, and in his world, that was an unforgivable offense. "I said," Hayes growled, leaning in so close the boys could smell the stale black coffee on his breath, "don't play games with me." The ambient noise of the Chick-fil-A began to fade into a tense, suffocating silence. People at nearby tables stopped eating, heads turned. Cell phones slowly emerged from pockets, resting discreetly on tabletops with camera lenses pointed toward the corner booth. "Officer, I promise you we didn't take anything," Isaiah said, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts to stay calm. He remembered the talk his father had given him when he turned 12. "Keep your hands visible, speak clearly, do not argue, do not make sudden movements. We've been sitting in this exact booth for an hour. We haven't even gotten up. Is that right?" Hayes sneered. He reached out and snatched Malik's back off the seat next to him. "Hey, you can't search my bag," Malik blurted out, panic overwhelming his common sense. "Oh, have probable cause, kid," Hayes shot back, ripping the zipper open. He aggressively dumped the contents of Malik's backpack directly onto the table, right over their history project. Textbooks, a graphing calculator, crushed gym clothes, and a handful of mechanical pencils scattered across the waffle fry boxes. Nothing. No extra iPads. Hayes grabbed Isaiah's backpack next, tearing it open and dumping it onto the floor. Binders hit the linoleum with a heavy smack. The plastic water bottle rolled away under the neighboring table. Still nothing. Chloe Harrington, who had crept closer to watch the spectacle, peered over Hayes's shoulder. She looked at the silver school-issued iPads on the table, then at the scattered school supplies. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Officer," Chloe murmured, suddenly sounding much less confident than she had 3 minutes prior. "My iPads. They were in the boxes. The white Apple boxes. And they had pink magnetic cases wrapped around them. Those aren't mine." It was the perfect moment for Officer Mitchell Hayes to take a step back. It was the perfect moment for him to apologize, help the boys pick up their books, and go check the security footage like the manager had originally suggested. But Hayes was already in too deep, and his pride was a fragile, dangerous thing. He couldn't back down in front of a restaurant full of spectators. If they didn't have the iPads on them, they must have hidden them. "Where did you stash them?" Hayes demanded, ignoring Chloe completely. He grabbed Isaiah by the shoulder of his hoodie, pulling him forcefully out of the booth. "I didn't stash anything. We didn't do anything," Isaiah yelled, his fear finally breaking through his composed facade. "Get up," Hayes barked at Malik, yanking the 14-year-old by his arm. Malik stumbled out of the booth, tears welling in his eyes. "Sir, please, you are hurting him," Isaiah pleaded, taking a half-step toward his cousin. That was all Hayes needed. He interpreted the slight forward movement as aggression. In a flash, Hayes unclipped his handcuffs. He spun Isaiah around, slamming the teenager face first against the glass partition that separated the dining room from the exit corridor. Clack. Clack. The cold metal ratcheted tightly around Isaiah's wrists. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Malik let out a choked sob, backing away, his hands raised in the air. "Don't shoot us, please don't shoot us," he cried out, trembling violently. "Turn around, hands behind your back," Hayes ordered Malik. The smaller boy complied instantly, sobbing hysterically as a second pair of handcuffs was aggressively secured around his wrists. Gregory Sutton, the manager, stood frozen behind the register, his face completely pale. He had the power to stop this. He had the authority to tell the officer to step outside, to demand he wait for the camera footage. Instead, Gregory looked down at his shoes, choosing the safety of complicity over the risk of intervening. "You're making a mistake," Isaiah shouted, his cheek pressed against the glass. "Call my dad. Please, just call my dad." "You can call whoever you want from holding," Hayes replied coldly. He grabbed both boys by the center chain of their handcuffs, marching them toward the exit. The walk out of the restaurant was agonizing. 50 pairs of eyes watched them. Some people whispered. Some shook their heads in judgment, assuming the boys must have done something to deserve it. Isaiah felt a hot, burning flush of humiliation crawl up his neck. He was an honors student. He had never even had a detention. Now he was being paraded through his hometown like a violent criminal. Hayes shoved them into the back of his cramped patrol cruiser, slamming the heavy door shut. The plastic seats were hard and uncomfortable. The air conditioning was blasted on high, making Malik shiver uncontrollably as tears streamed down his face. As Hayes climbed into the driver's seat and put the car in gear, Chloe Harrington ran out the front doors of the Chick-fil-A, waving her arms. "Officer, Officer Wade," she yelled, running up to the window. In her hand she held 2 white apple boxes wrapped in bright pink magnetic cases. "I found them. They fell off the table and slid underneath the booth in the back." "I found them." Hayes rolled down his window, staring blankly at the iPads in Chloe's hands. He looked in his rear-view mirror at the 2 terrified, handcuffed, innocent children in his back seat. Once again, he had a choice. He could let them go. Instead, his jaw tightened. He had just publicly arrested 2 minors. If he let them out now, the liability, the paperwork, and the sheer embarrassment would ruin his week. He needed a charge to justify the cuffs, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, anything. "I still need to take them in for processing," Hayes lied smoothly to Chloe. "They created a disturbance and resisted my lawful orders." "Have a good day, ma'am." He rolled up the window, hit the sirens, and pulled out onto Maple Street, speeding toward the Crestview Police Precinct. He thought he was in control of the narrative. He thought he could bully a confession out of them, scare them, and release them with a warning to never cross him again. He didn't know Malik's last name was Caldwell. The holding area of the Crestview Police Precinct was exactly as grim and sterile as television made it out to be. Fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the scuffed concrete floors. The air smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat. Isaiah and Malik were placed in a small windowless interrogation room. Their handcuffs had finally been removed, leaving angry, raw red rings around their wrists. Malik sat in the corner, his knees pulled up to his chest, rocking slightly and crying softly. Isaiah sat rigidly at the metal table, rubbing his wrists, his mind racing. They had been in the room for 45 minutes. No one had told them what they were officially charged with. No one had read them their Miranda rights. They had simply been dumped in the room and left to sweat. Finally, the heavy metal door swung open. Officer Hayes walked in holding a clipboard. He pulled out a metal chair and sat down backward, crossing his arms over the backrest. He looked incredibly relaxed, entirely self-satisfied. "All right, gentlemen," Hayes began, dropping a pen onto the table. "Here's how this is going to work. You caused a major disturbance in a private business. You refused lawful orders. You exhibited aggressive behavior toward a sworn officer of the law. I can write this up as resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. That's a trip to juvenile hall, a permanent record, and goodbye to any college scholarships." Hayes leaned in, tapping his finger on the table. "Or you can sign a statement admitting you were causing a disturbance, apologize for your behavior, and I let you call your parents to come pick you up. I give you a warning. We all go home." It was a classic coercion tactic. Terrify the suspect, offer a seemingly easy way out, and secure a signed admission of guilt that retroactively justified an illegal arrest. Isaiah looked at Hayes, his jaw set. The fear that had paralyzed him in the restaurant was slowly being replaced by a cold, burning anger. "I'm not signing anything. We didn't do anything wrong. You illegally searched our bags, and you assaulted us." Hayes' eyes narrowed. The kid was smarter than he looked. "Careful, boy. You're treading on very thin ice." "I want my phone call," Malik spoke up from the corner, his voice thick and wavering. "By law, we are entitled to a phone call." Hayes rolled his eyes, standing up. "Fine. You want to drag this out? Be my guest, but you use the precinct phone right out there at the booking desk. Let's go." He escorted Malik out of the room to the heavy black rotary phone bolted to the wall near the sergeant's desk. The desk sergeant, an older man named Higgins, barely looked up from his paperwork. Malik picked up the receiver. His hands were shaking so badly he misdialed the first time. He hung up, took a deep breath, and dialed again. He didn't call his mother, who was a nurse working a double shift at the downtown hospital. He didn't call his father, who was out of state on a business trip. He called his grandmother. 3 miles away, inside the opulent, mahogany-paneled boardroom of Crestview City Hall, Beatrice Caldwell was in the middle of dismantling the city's proposed infrastructure budget. Beatrice Caldwell was not merely a grandmother. She was the Crestview City Councilwoman for District 4. She was a former corporate litigator with a mind like a steel trap and a gaze that could peel paint off a wall. More importantly, she was the chairperson of the Municipal Finance and Public Safety Oversight Committee. She quite literally approved the Crestview Police Department's annual budget, authorized their pension funds, and signed off on their overtime pay. She was one of the 3 most powerful political figures in the county. Her personal cell phone, resting on the table next to a stack of zoning permits, began to vibrate. It was a restricted number. Usually she ignored these, but something made her pick it up. She raised a finger, pausing the city planner mid-sentence. "Councilwoman Caldwell," she answered crisply. "Nana?" "Might." The sound of her 14-year-old grandson's tearful, terrified voice caused the temperature in the boardroom to plummet. Beatrice stood up immediately, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Malik? Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "Nana, we're at the police station. Me and Isaiah. They arrested us at Chick-fil-A. They put us in handcuffs, Nana. The cop said we stole iPads, but we didn't, and then they didn't even find them, but he brought us here anyway. He's trying to make us sign a paper saying we resisted arrest." Malik was hyperventilating now, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. Beatrice Caldwell did not panic. She did not cry. A terrifying, lethal calm settled over her features. "Malik, listen to me very carefully," Beatrice said, her voice completely steady, radiating absolute authority. "Do not say another word to anyone. Do not sign a single piece of paper. You tell Isaiah to do exactly the same. What is the name of the officer who brought you in?" "Hayes," Malik sniffled. Officer Hayes. I will be there in exactly 7 minutes, Beatrice said. I love you. Hang up the phone. Beatrice ended the call. She didn't offer the city planner an apology or an explanation. She simply picked up her designer briefcase, adjusted her blazer, and walked out of the boardroom. Back at the precinct, Malik hung up the phone. Hayes smirked at him, snatching the receiver and slamming it back onto the cradle. Got your mummy coming to save you, or is Daddy going to come yell at me? My grandmother is coming, Malik said quietly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Hayes let out a sharp, barking laugh. Your grandma. Oh, I'm shaking in my boots. Let's get you back in the room before she shows up with a plate of cookies. Hayes had no idea that the grandma currently speeding toward the precinct in a sleek black Mercedes was not bringing cookies. She was bringing a thermonuclear legal and political storm that was about to wipe his career off the map. 6 minutes and 45 seconds later, the heavy glass front doors of the Crestview Police Precinct were pushed open with such force that they banged loudly against the metal doorstops. Beatrice Caldwell stepped into the lobby. She was flanked by 2 men. One was Desmond Pierce, the most ruthless civil rights attorney in the state of Georgia, whom she had called on speakerphone during her drive. The other was Mayor Richard Dalton, who had been in the office next to hers and had quite literally sprinted to his car to intercept her when he heard the words "police" and "my grandsons." The desk sergeant, Higgins, looked up from his paperwork. When he saw the mayor looking pale and sweating, and Councilwoman Caldwell looking like an angel of death, the pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk. "Good afternoon, Sergeant," Beatrice said, her voice perfectly polite and absolutely dripping with venom. "I believe you have my grandsons in the back, Malik Caldwell and Isaiah Robinson, and I believe I need to speak with an Officer Hayes." Immediately, Sergeant Higgins stood up so fast his chair rolled backward and slammed into a filing cabinet. He recognized the mayor immediately, of course, but he also recognized Beatrice Caldwell. Every officer in Crestview knew Beatrice Caldwell. Her signature was quite literally at the bottom of their bi-weekly paychecks. Councilwoman Caldwell, Mayor Dalton. Higgins stammered, his hands hovering uselessly over his desk. Let me get the captain." "You don't need to get the captain, Sergeant," Desmond Pierce, the attorney, interrupted smoothly. He stepped forward, placing a slim leather briefcase on the counter. Desmond was a tall, imposing figure with a notoriously razor-sharp memory and a completely unyielding demeanor. "You need to bring Malik Caldwell and Isaiah Robinson out to this lobby right now. And you need to secure all body camera footage, dash camera footage, and internal surveillance footage from the last 2 hours. If a single frame of data goes missing, I will personally see to it that the federal government dismantles this precinct brick by brick." Higgins swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, I can't release suspects without the arresting officer signing off." "They are not suspects, Higgins." Mayor Dalton barked, his face red with a mixture of exertion from his sprint and sheer, unadulterated panic. Dalton was up for re-election in 8 months, and a civil rights violation against the grandsons of the city's most influential councilwoman was a political death sentence. "Bring them out here, now." Before Higgins could reach for his radio, the heavy metal door leading to the holding cells swung open. Officer Mitchell Hayes strolled into the lobby. He had a styrofoam cup of water in one hand and his clipboard in the other. He was entirely oblivious to the identity of the people standing on the other side of the bulletproof glass. "Hey, Higgins," Hayes called out lazily. "The Caldwell kid called his grandma. Keep an eye out for a sweet old lady. She's probably going to come in here crying. Just hand her the release forms and tell her to make sure the kid shows up for his court date." The silence in the lobby was so absolute, so heavy, it felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Beatrice Caldwell took 2 steps forward until she was inches from the glass. She looked at Hayes not with anger, but with the cold, dissecting gaze of a biologist looking at a remarkably stupid insect. "I am the grandmother," Beatrice said, her voice dropping into a register of quiet, terrifying authority. "And I assure you, Officer Hayes, no one is crying. And no one is signing a release form." Hayes paused, taking in the scene. He looked at Beatrice in her immaculate tailored suit. He looked at Desmond Pierce. Then his eyes landed on Mayor Richard Dalton. The styrofoam cup in Hayes's hand crumpled slightly, water spilling over his knuckles. "Mr. Mayor," Hayes said, his arrogant swagger evaporating instantly. What are you doing here?" "I am here," Mayor Dalton ground out through clenched teeth, "because you apparently decided to arrest the grandsons of the chairwoman of the Public Safety Committee over a misunderstanding at a fast food restaurant." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Hayes said defensively, his pride instinctively trying to salvage the situation. He stepped up to the glass, his voice rising. "They were causing a disturbance. They stole property. When I confronted them, they resisted arrest and assaulted a police officer." It was the worst lie he could have possibly told. Desmond Pierce didn't yell. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his iPhone, and tapped the screen. "Is that right, Officer Hayes? They assaulted you." Desmond held the phone up to the glass. On the screen was a crystal-clear, high-definition video. It was already trending on Twitter with 60,000 views. A bystander in a Chick-fil-A had recorded the entire interaction. The video played loudly in the quiet lobby. "I said," the digital version of Hayes growled on the recording, "don't play games with me." The video showed Hayes aggressively dumping the boys' backpacks. It showed the clear neon green school district stickers on the iPads. It showed Hayes grabbing Isaiah, slamming him face first against the glass partition, and ratcheting the handcuffs tight while the teenager pleaded for his father. It showed Malik sobbing, his hands in the air, offering zero resistance as Hayes violently spun him around. Worst of all, the video captured the moment outside. It showed Chloe Harrington running up to the cruiser holding the iPads. The audio caught her screaming, "I found them. They fell off the table." And it caught Hayes deliberately rolling up his window and driving away. Hayes stared at the phone screen, the color completely drained from his face. His career was flashing before his eyes, burning to ash in real time. "You lied on an official police report," Desmond Pierce stated clearly, his voice echoing in the lobby. "You committed battery against a minor. You conducted an illegal search without probable cause. You executed a false arrest, and you willfully ignored exculpatory evidence because your fragile ego couldn't handle being wrong." Just then, Captain Thomas Reynolds came rushing out of his back office, his uniform slightly disheveled. He had been monitoring the security feed and realized an apocalyptic scenario was unfolding in his lobby. "Councilwoman Caldwell, Mayor," Reynolds breathed heavily, rushing to the counter. "There's been a massive miscommunication. We are processing the boy's release right now. All charges are being dropped. It was a terrible mistake." "It was not a mistake, Captain Reynolds," Beatrice said, her eyes never leaving Hayes, who was now visibly trembling. "A mistake is forgetting to use a turn signal. This was a targeted, malicious assault fueled by prejudice and a gross abuse of power. Bring me my boys." 2 minutes later, the door opened, and Isaiah and Malik were escorted out. When Malik saw his grandmother, his tough exterior shattered completely. He ran to her, burying his face in her shoulder, sobbing openly. Beatrice wrapped her arms tightly around him, her stoic facade breaking just enough to let a single tear roll down her cheek. Isaiah stood beside them, rubbing his raw, bruised wrists, looking exhausted and traumatized. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Beatrice whispered to Isaiah, pulling him into the embrace as well. "He hurt my wrists, Nana," Malik cried. He wouldn't listen to us. "I know, baby. I know," Beatrice said, kissing the top of his head. She looked over Malik's shoulder, locking eyes with Captain Reynolds and Officer Hayes. "Captain," Beatrice said, her voice echoing with devastating finality, "I want his badge, his gun, and his resignation on my desk by tomorrow morning. If I don't have them, I am freezing the department's discretionary fund, I am auditing your overtime logs, and I will personally see to it that this precinct is put under federal consent decree." She turned to Desmond Pierce. "Desmond, draft the papers. We're going to bankrupt them." The next morning, the Crestview suburb woke up to an absolute media firestorm. The video of the arrest had exploded overnight, amassing over 10 million views. Local news vans were parked on the manicured lawns outside the police precinct and City Hall. The story had transcended local gossip and become a national headline. Veteran cop arrests councilwoman's grandsons over school iPads. The boys stayed home from school. The trauma of the event had left them both deeply shaken. Malik couldn't sleep, waking up with panic attacks, terrified that police were coming into his room. Isaiah was quiet, withdrawing into himself, the profound humiliation and realization of his own powerlessness in the face of a badge eating away at his usual cheerful demeanor. For Beatrice Caldwell, the emotional damage inflicted on her family was the catalyst for a total scorched earth legal campaign. She wasn't just out for revenge, she was out to dismantle the system that allowed Officer Hayes to operate. 48 hours after the arrest, Desmond Pierce filed a sprawling $3.2 million federal civil rights lawsuit against the Crestview Police Department, the city of Crestview, and Officer Mitchell Hayes individually. The lawsuit cited false arrest, false imprisonment, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and civil rights violations under the 14th Amendment. The city's legal defense team immediately went into damage control. They reached out to Desmond Pierce, offering a quick, quiet settlement. $100,000, paid out of the city's insurance fund, with a standard non-disclosure agreement attached. Desmond laughed into the phone and hung up, because Desmond and Beatrice weren't just relying on the video. They were digging, and what they found turned a straightforward excessive force case into a massive department-wide conspiracy. During the initial discovery phase of the lawsuit, Desmond filed a subpoena for Officer Mitchell Hayes' entire internal affairs file. The police department's attorneys fought the subpoena tooth and nail, filing motion after motion to keep the records sealed, citing officer privacy. But Beatrice Caldwell was still the chairwoman of the Public Safety Committee. She called an emergency public city council meeting. In front of packed gallery of furious citizens and rolling news cameras, she systematically threatened to defund the city's legal defense budget unless the records were turned over. Mayor Dalton, terrified of the mob and his plummeting poll numbers, bypassed his own lawyers and ordered the chief of police to hand over the files. When Desmond Pierce opened the thick manila folder, he struck gold. Mitchell Hayes did not just make a mistake at the Chick-fil-A. He had a pattern. Over his 12-year career, Hayes had accumulated 11 separate complaints for excessive force, racial profiling, and false arrest. The twist? None of them had ever seen the light of day. Through the depositions, Desmond uncovered a systemic cover-up, orchestrated by the police union representative Sergeant Donahue and Captain Reynolds. Every time Hayes crossed the line, Donahue would intervene, intimidating the victims, mostly teenagers or young adults from the poorer, neighboring county who drove through Crestview in tow, dropping their complaints. Captain Reynolds would then quietly bury the paperwork in a secondary unofficial filing system. The $3.2 million lawsuit was no longer just about 2 stolen iPads. It was a RICO-level exposure of a corrupt precinct. The walls began to close in on Hayes. The police union, realizing the sheer magnitude of the public relations disaster and the undeniable paper trail, abruptly dropped his legal representation. He was left completely isolated, facing ruinous financial liabilities. And then the final domino fell: Chloe Harrington. Chloe, the woman who had falsely accused the boys in the first place, was subpoenaed for a deposition. She arrived at Desmond Pierce's downtown office looking terrified, wearing a pair of oversized sunglasses and trembling violently. Under oath, Desmond leaned across the conference table. "Miss Harrington, after you found your iPads in the restaurant, you approached Officer Hayes's vehicle. What exactly did he say to you?" Chloe burst into tears. "I told him I found them. I told him the boys were innocent." She sobbed into a tissue. But he looked at me. He had this terrible look in his eyes. "He told me that if I opened my mouth, he would arrest me for filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. He said he knew where I worked. He told me to go home and shut up, or he would ruin my life." The deposition transcript was leaked to the press, anonymously, though Beatrice Caldwell had a faint smile on her face when she read the morning paper. It was the final nail in the coffin. Mitchell Hayes had not only assaulted 2 innocent minors, but he had witness-tampered and threatened a civilian to cover up his crime. The district attorney, who had been dragging his feet, could no longer ignore the mountain of evidence. The FBI's Civil Rights Division announced they were opening an independent probe into the Crestview Police Department's internal affairs practices. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the incident at Chick-fil-A, Mitchell Hayes was officially terminated from the Crestview Police Department. But his nightmare was just beginning. As he walked out of the precinct with a cardboard box of his belongings, he was met by 2 State Bureau of Investigation agents. Right there on the wet pavement, in front of the local news cameras, Mitchell Hayes was placed in handcuffs. He was charged with 2 felony counts of false imprisonment, 1 count of battery, and 1 count of witness intimidation. Inside City Hall, Beatrice Caldwell watched the arrest live on a television monitor in her office. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She just picked up her phone and dialed her daughter. "They got him," Beatrice said quietly. "Tell Malik and Isaiah they don't have to be afraid anymore." 8 months after the catastrophic incident at the Maple Street Chick-fil-A, the air inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta was thick with tension. The civil trial of Caldwell and Robinson v. the city of Crestview had become a media circus. Every major news network had a correspondent parked outside the courthouse steps. The $3.2 million lawsuit had ballooned into a sprawling federal civil rights case, and Beatrice Caldwell had refused every single settlement offer. 2 weeks before the trial, the newly appointed interim mayor, a nervous man named Arthur Pendleton, had practically begged Beatrice and her attorney, Desmond Pierce, to take a $4.5 million payout. The only condition was a strict non-disclosure agreement and the sealing of all internal police department files discovered during the pre-trial phase. Beatrice had sat in Desmond's plush high-rise office staring across the glass table at the city's sweating defense attorneys. She didn't blink. "You misunderstand the fundamental nature of this negotiation, gentlemen," Beatrice had said, her voice a terrifyingly calm whisper. "You are trying to buy my silence to protect your pensions. I am not interested in your money in the dark. I want your total, systematic humiliation in the light of a federal courtroom. I want every single mother in this state to see exactly what you do when you think no one is watching." She rejected the check. The trial began. The plaintiff's table was a fortress of legal firepower. Desmond Pierce sat at the helm, flanked by 3 junior partners. Behind them, in the first row of the gallery, sat Beatrice Caldwell, holding the hands of her 2 grandsons. Isaiah and Malik were dressed in sharp, tailored navy suits. They looked older, hardened by the trauma of the past year, but they sat with a quiet, dignified strength that commanded the respect of every juror in the box. At the defense table sat Mitchell Hayes. He was a shell of the arrogant, swaggering officer who had brutalized the boys. He had lost 30 pounds. His uniform had been replaced by an ill-fitting grey suit. The police union, terrified of the RICO implications Desmond had threatened, had completely abandoned him. He was relying on a public defender who looked entirely out of his depth. The first 3 days of the trial were a systematic dismantling of the Crestview Police Department's credibility. Desmond played the viral Chick-fil-A video. He put Chloe Harrington on the stand, where she tearfully recounted Hayes's vicious threats to ruin her life if she told the truth about the iPads. He put the Chick-fil-A manager, Gregory Sutton, on the stand, forcing him to admit he was too terrified of Hayes's notorious temper to intervene. But the true twist, the revelation that would burn the department to the ground, came on the morning of day 4. Desmond Pierce stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiffs call Captain Thomas Reynolds to the stand." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Captain Reynolds was the commanding officer of the Crestview precinct. He was named as a co-defendant in the lawsuit. Why was the plaintiff calling a hostile witness? Reynolds walked down the center aisle, his face pale, his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He took the oath, sat in the witness box, and adjusted the microphone with trembling hands. Hayes stared at his former boss, a deep, sickening feeling of dread pooling in his stomach. "Captain Reynolds," Desmond began, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. "Let's skip the pleasantries. 2 days ago, you approached the Department of Justice and requested a meeting with the federal prosecutors overseeing the separate criminal probe into this precinct. Is that correct?" The defense attorney shot up, objecting wildly, but the judge slammed his gavel, overruling them. "Yes," Reynolds answered, his voice barely a croak. "That is correct. And during that meeting, Captain, did you negotiate a deal for federal immunity in exchange for turning state's evidence against your own department?" "Yes." Hayes gripped the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He was being fed to the wolves. "Captain Reynolds, I want to talk about the Discretionary Benevolence Fund," Desmond said, pulling a thick black leather-bound ledger from his briefcase. He dropped it onto the evidence table with a heavy, echoing thud. "Can you tell the jury what this is?" Reynolds swallowed hard, looking physically ill. It's the unofficial ledger, kept by Sergeant Donahue, the union rep, and myself." "And what exactly does this ledger record, Captain?" Reynolds closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked directly at Beatrice Caldwell in the gallery. "It records the hush money. Whenever an officer, specifically Officer Hayes, crossed the line, used excessive force, or made a racially motivated false arrest, the union would step in. We would approach the victims. We would use intimidation, threats of countercharges, and cash payouts from the benevolence fund to make them sign non-disclosure agreements and drop their complaints." Pandemonium erupted in the courtroom. Reporters scrambled for the doors to broadcast the bombshell. The judge hammered his gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the gallery. "How many times, Captain Reynolds?" Desmond shouted over the noise, pointing a long, accusatory finger at Mitchell Hayes. "Did you and the union use taxpayer and union funds to cover up Officer Hayes's violent civil rights violations?" 11 times, Reynolds confessed, his voice breaking. "Over 12 years, we paid out over $400,000 to keep his record clean." "Why?" Desmond demanded, moving closer to the witness stand. "Why protect him? Why keep a rabid dog on the street?" "Because he was the highest ticket writer in the precinct," Reynolds admitted shamefully, wiping sweat from his forehead. "He brought in massive revenue for the city through traffic citations and asset forfeitures. The Mayor Dalton, made it clear that Hayes was an earner. We were told to look the other way." Desmond turned slowly, letting the sheer weight of the corruption settle over the horrified jury. He looked at Mitchell Hayes, who was now weeping silently at the defense table, his life utterly destroyed. "No more questions, Your Honor," Desmond said quietly. The jury deliberations did not drag out for weeks. They didn't even last a full business day. Inside the heavy oak walls of the jury room, there was no agonizing debate, no conflicting interpretations of the law, and no sympathy for the defendants. There was only a cold, unified, and burning outrage. It took exactly 3 hours and 45 minutes for the foreperson to press the buzzer. When the bailiff announced that a verdict had been reached, the atmosphere inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building shifted from anxious murmuring to a suffocating, breathless silence. Beatrice Caldwell sat in the front row of the gallery, her spine perfectly straight, a silver cross resting against her tailored collar. She held Malik's hand in her left and Isaiah's in her right. The boys, now older, taller, and forever changed by the trauma of the past 8 months, stared intensely at the heavy wooden door where the jurors were about to emerge. Across the aisle, Mitchell Hayes looked like a ghost. The arrogant, broad-shouldered officer who had violently slammed Isaiah against a restaurant window was entirely gone. He sat slumped in an ill-fitting gray suit, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling violently on the defense table. He knew what Captain Reynolds' testimony meant. He knew the shadow ledger had destroyed any hope of salvation. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Harrison boomed, his voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. Hayes stood, his knees visibly buckling. His public defender had to grip his elbow to keep him upright. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with stern eyes, cleared her throat. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Hayes. "On the count of false arrest, we find the defendants liable," she read, her voice ringing clear as a bell. "On the count of battery, liable. On the count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, liable. On the count of gross civil rights violations under the 14th Amendment, liable." Every word struck Hayes like a physical blow. But the true devastation, the shockwave that would permanently alter the political landscape of Georgia, was yet to come. Regarding compensatory damages for the plaintiffs, Isaiah Robinson and Malik Caldwell, we award the requested amount of $3.2 million. The foreperson continued. The courtroom let out a collective gasp, but the foreperson raised her voice to cut through the noise. "Furthermore, due to the egregious, systematic, and malicious nature of the Crestview Police Department's cover-up, we award punitive damages against the City of Crestview and the police union in the amount of $15 million. Total award, $18.2 million. Pandemonium erupted. Reporters scrambled over one another, sprinting for the heavy double doors to broadcast the bombshell. Flashbulbs from the hallway blinded the room. Malik buried his face in his grandmother's shoulder, finally releasing a violent, shuddering sob, the physical manifestation of 8 months of pure terror, finally leaving his body. Isaiah stood tall, tears streaming down his face, and reached over the wooden railing to firmly shake Desmond Pierce's hand. But justice for Beatrice Caldwell was never just going to be financial. As Judge Harrison slammed his gavel to dismiss the jury, the back doors of the courtroom swung open. 3 federal marshals wearing tactical vests marched down the center aisle. Thanks to Captain Reynolds' immunity deal and testimony, the state charges against Hayes had been superseded by federal civil rights indictments. Mitchell Hayes, the lead marshal, said, bypassing the wooden gate and grabbing the disgraced officer by the shoulders, "You are under arrest for federal civil rights violations, witness tampering, and felony deprivation of rights under color of law." Oh. Bye. Right there in front of the local news cameras, the national press, and the 2 boys he had brutalized. The metal handcuffs were ratcheted tightly around Mitchell Hayes' wrists. The poetic justice was absolute. He was led out of the courtroom weeping, his career, his freedom, and his reputation burned to ash. 3 months later, he would be sentenced to 12 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, completely stripped of any possibility of early parole. The political fallout hit the Crestview suburb like a Category 5 hurricane. Mayor Richard Dalton, directly implicated in the revenue generation scheme that protected corrupt officers like Hayes, did not even wait for an indictment. He resigned via a 1-paragraph email the following morning and fled to a vacation home in Florida. It didn't save him. The FBI indicted him for public corruption 2 weeks later. Captain Reynolds, despite his immunity deal regarding federal charges, was stripped of his pension and permanently barred from law enforcement by the State Certification Board. The entire Crestview Police Department was placed under a draconian 5-year federal consent decree. But Beatrice Caldwell was not finished. She knew that cutting off the heads of a few snakes wouldn't kill the nest. With the city's political establishment completely fractured and leaderless, Beatrice announced her candidacy for mayor of Crestview in the emergency special election. She didn't just win. She obliterated her opposition, capturing a historic 82% of the vote. Her very first act as mayor was to draft, introduce, and aggressively pass the Caldwell Act. It was the most ruthless piece of municipal legislation in state history. It entirely dissolved the corrupt police union's existing contract. It mandated that all internal affairs investigations be permanently stripped from police control and handed over to an independent, civilian-led oversight board with full subpoena power. Furthermore, it explicitly banned the use of any municipal funds for non-disclosure agreements regarding police misconduct. If a Crestview officer broke the law, their body camera footage would instantly upload to an independent cloud server, and their actions would be public record. Forever. As for Chloe Harrington, the woman whose frantic, baseless, and entitled accusations had ignited the entire nightmare, she found no shelter. Under intense pressure from Beatrice's new administration, the district attorney charged Chloe with filing a false police report and obstruction of justice. Standing before a judge, she wept, just as she had in the Chick-fil-A, but this time there was no corrupt cop to protect her. She was sentenced to 500 hours of mandatory community service, specifically assigned to a legal aid clinic in downtown Atlanta that served marginalized, at-risk youth. She was forced to look the very demographic she had so easily accused in the eye every single day for a year. 2 years after the incident, life had irrevocably changed for Isaiah and Malik. They did not buy sports cars, designer watches, or massive mansions with their $18 million settlement. Guided by their grandmother's relentless sense of civic duty, the boys took the vast majority of their funds and established the Maple Street Defense Foundation. The nonprofit organization was designed to provide elite, top-tier legal representation for minority teenagers across the state who were facing false accusations, police harassment, or systemic profiling. They hired Desmond Pierce as the chief of their legal advisory board. On a bright, crisp morning in late May, Isaiah stood on the brightly lit stage of the Crestview High School auditorium. He was dressed in a pristine emerald green cap and gown. The raw red bruising on his wrists had faded long ago, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence that radiated from his core. As the valedictorian of his graduating class, he stepped up to the wooden podium. He adjusted the microphone, looking out at the massive sea of parents, teachers, and students. In the front row sat Malik, cheering wildly, and beside him sat Mayor Beatrice Caldwell, beaming with an immense, fierce pride that brought tears to her eyes. We are often told that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice, Isaiah said, his voice echoing clearly and powerfully through the auditorium. He looked directly at the back of the room, right at the spot where 2 newly trained, heavily monitored school resource officers were standing. But I learned the hard way that it doesn't bend on its own. It doesn't bend because we wish for it. You have to pull it. You have to drag it. You have to stand your ground when people with absolute power try to push you into the shadows. He gripped the edges of the podium, a soft smile breaking across his face. 2 years ago, someone tried to take away my future over a piece of glass and metal. They thought because I was young, because of the way I looked, I wouldn't fight back. Today, I am here to tell you that no badge, no corrupt institution, and no amount of prejudice is stronger than the truth. Do not ever let anyone silence you. The auditorium erupted into a deafening standing ovation. The Crestview Police Department thought they were dealing with 2 defenseless kids who would quietly take the blame, sign a confession, and fade into the local crime statistics. They didn't realize that by putting those metal handcuffs on Isaiah and Malik, they had inadvertently handed the keys to the entire city to the one family strong enough, smart enough, and brave enough to tear their corrupt foundation down to the dirt. If this story made your blood boil and your heart cheer, you are not alone. The fight for justice, accountability, and standing up against corruption is a battle we all need to witness. The Caldwell family proved that when you hold your ground and demand the truth, even the most powerful institutions can be brought to their knees. What did you think of Beatrice's brilliant takedown of the police department? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible true-to-life drama stories.